Alrighty, here we go. That should work. All right. So, hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Lucid Dreaming program. We're starting with the second and third and fourth week of the program. And the first, congratulations, by the way, on doing the exercises and going through this whole thing with me. I'm patting myself on the back, So, um,
and you should.
right? Yeah, that was a lot of hard work.
Nobody else will do it.
With this part of the program, we're going to start with an exercise in the training of the will. And what that's going to look like in execution is we're going to be doing a single exercise that's only going to take about 5 minutes that we're going to do every single day for the next 2 weeks. And the exercise is designed to be essentially arbitrary in nature. So the real focus of the exercise is that you're just getting yourself to do this arbitrary thing on a regular basis at your command, right? And that's going to build up this faculty of the will. And so maybe we can start off with talking about why that's important, and then we'll get into the exact exercise that we're going to utilize for that.
Sure. Why that's important is, initially just being able to do it is one thing, but then of course there's a second part of that exercise, right? So which we're going to do in the future, in the next training video, right? So, but we need to start with the stepping stones, right? We need to get those things in place, and I think that's really important for all of these things. I mean, we're constantly trying to balance the two things of what's a nice logical progression, and at the same time, what's going to be the most efficient, method of learning. And also, we don't want it to become some accounting course, right? Where you're like falling asleep. Sorry, accountants, but for most of us, learning about numbers is pretty damn boring, right? So, and so we're constantly, I think that, Jay Shetty is right. It's like, how do we get people to engage education, at the same rate as they engage entertainment, right? So let's utilize this distraction factor in our favor. Like, let's make it engaging and entertaining so that people will be revved up and come to the table with like, okay, what kooky kind of thing am I going to do today? And if I can see, maybe I don't see exactly today why that's important, but in the next one, we're going to see how it's strung together. And it's like, oh, that's why I did that. I cannot tell you how many times that it's so consistent a practice within, let's say esoteric societies or, training of spiritual matters that, we do things that seemingly have no value, right? Or it's like, just the whim of our instructor or whatever, just, maybe they're laughing behind the wall at us, because we're doing it, and it's like, and just for their entertainment, right? But then, we see as time goes on, like, oh, that's where this gets put into place. And if I wouldn't have done that first, I never would have been able to make this exercise work. Or it would have been so complex because so many pieces need to be in place, individually, and then you put it together and it becomes this very strong exercise, right? And so without that, it just becomes a jumble and, can be really discouraging because, there's too much thought process going on. Remember that, our analysis and breaking down of things happens first, but when we do the practice, it's all about just doing the practice. I don't want to have to think like, what's the next step? Oh, I should write it, I have to look it up. And, oh, does that mean this or that? That analysis part has to be done way ahead of time. All right. That's a separate thing. And that way, when I go to do the practice, I'm just in the practice. I'm just going through the event, right? And if I forget something or I mess it up, good. I come back and I'm like, okay, I had this experience or I had no experience, right? Is it an experience in and of itself? And so, and then I go back and say, oh, because I forgot this step or whatever. So now I'm going to memorize and put a little bit more attention on that, memorize that one segment that, I had to think too much about and get it really down so I can add that into the full exercise and let the full exercise, become my experience, right? It's all about the experience when we're doing the exercises, right? But when we're analyzing and breaking it down and learning the modules, it's about, learning that so that later on it can be implemented in a good way. So there is a method to the madness. That's the real point here, right? So even the things that seem the most ridiculous to you, which this may be in that category, at least in the beginning, and we're only in the second week, right?
Third week.
Well, third week, but
right.
Second week of actual training more things, right?
Yes.
And so, and we're already, implementing some of these, kind of obscure training techniques. But the idea for me is, one of the things that makes this course different than other courses that I've seen, whether in books or whether in, recorded courses or whatever, is that, I'm setting people up for the long haul. It's like all of these little incremental things. My idea is that you want to be able to get in there, not just at a random pace here or there, but consistently over and over again, to the degree that you want it to happen. And so that you're not, falling short on a regular basis because you're too tired or whatever, and, things are bothering you, whatever it is, right? You want to be able to get in there and be able to do it at will, right? So we've taken a lot more steps and broken it down and put these things into place for that reason. So, but that being said, let's move into this first part of the craziness, right? So we want to pick something because we're going to train the will, right? And what does that mean? Is it willpower? I mean, some people translate it that way, but basically it's almost like, it's not just the willpower. It's not just pushing yourself to do something, but it's training it so that the pattern of that training kind of comes through with everything else that you do. Once you instigate the ability to, in your mind, hold a certain idea, maybe, verbally state it or write it down, and then you take action on it, right? And so there's something that you build within you. When that becomes consistent, it's almost like an independent, little you inside, right? That says, it's an assistant, right? That says, don't forget, you need to do this step next. It's funny the way that it works like that. I mean, initially, yeah, you're doing it, right? But over time, when you train the will correctly, it basically becomes this little assistant, right? That it's sort of in your head and saying, you're going to do this. Remember to do this too. Remember to be in this place. Remember to count this way. I mean, I've had experiences where even keeping a very consistent count in my mind of so many minutes, right? Counting the seconds down and training myself to do that, and, or doing so many repetitions of an exercise and, starting it off and keeping it at a certain pace, and then having the thought in my mind, like, oh, where am I? And this little voice coming up and saying, 27, 53, whatever it is, so you're right in time with that. And it's like, those are just some of those weird little things that come up, and you're kind of like, oh, if you've trained it well, that's exactly the way it works, right?
But is it also not like
the stepping stones?
But it's also just like following through with what you say you're going to do as well, right?
It's a huge part of it.
What you intend to do.
Right, what you intend to do. So, and you don't want to, breaking your will is a really bad thing, right? Because that gives it that chance to sort of slip out of, direction of where you want it to go, right? You want to have something that you're training that once you give it the command, it moves forward. And with lucid dreaming, it works with a lot of things, but with lucid dreaming, it really makes a difference, especially when you're first starting out, right? Because we want to train that prospective memory, right? Like, most of us cheat, during, these days, because we have phones, right? Before we had little tablets or little pads that we would write our shopping list down on, or our little to-do lists, right? I mean, I still carry a to-do list. I mean, it's like I have it on my phone, right? But there's a way to do it. this has let this sort of prospective memory of remembering to do things sort of lapse, right? It's become a latent talent, or one that's, become flaccid because it's not used very often. It's like, how many people still just try to remember without writing it down to do things? And how many times do you do that and you forget, right? So then we end up putting it on a to-do list, right? So this is a way of training that, getting the will to participate in that prospective memory, training yourself to do something, and then, telling yourself, when this happens, we're going to do this. So if A, then B, right? So, and this is the first stepping stone to getting to that point. So we do something that, again, has, very little, if any, value to it, right? And it's important that we do those things, because if we use something of value and we train ourselves to do that and we miss it, we feel worse, right? We feel bad, like, oh, that was valuable, and, I forgot to do that. Oh, I'm a bad person. Well, we don't want to have that judgment. I don't know, I meant to remember my mom's birthday, but I forgot it. It's like, oh, you feel bad, right? Because it has, there's a perceived moral value to that, right? So when you do that, it's not just like, oh, I forgot, I'm going to call her right now and say, oh, Mom, I forgot your birthday, I'm so sorry about it. And she's going to go, oh, honey, it's okay, you called. But you've put this burden on yourself now. You've taken this on, for better or worse, you've done it. And so anything like that, I'm using, it's not extreme in the range, right? But it's something like that, right? You forgot your anniversary, or you forgot, whatever. A lot of times it's around those things, right? So anyway, you want to stay away from those things, because I don't want to add the extra burden of judgment on that, right? That there's some kind of moral judgment, like, oh, you're a bad person because you forgot that. So I don't want to add something like that to it. I want it to be so kind of nonsensical that there's really no value to it either way. It's just literally isolating and training yourself to remember to do something. That's it.
And following through with it.
Following through to do it, obviously, right? It's not just remembering it. If you remember it past the point of when you should have done it, that counts as that's an X on the square, right? So you don't get the check mark. You don't get the gold star on your head. You get a scratch, right? So, and then, there's consequences for that. And we make that non-value judgment too, right? For the most part, something minor, but something that, gives you the idea that, we're moving away from pain and moving toward pleasure, right? So there's a little bit of a dopamine rush when we achieve those small goals. And we're using our brains and what we know now, to facilitate that, and using the things that we have inherently in us to boost that up and make it better. So it's nice and simple. So we pick something that's, random. Right. And so I'm going to give you two. You can do something different, obviously, but you want to put it in that same category of no real value. Right. So one is going to be stand on a chair for 5 minutes. Make sure it's a stable chair. Okay. I don't want to get a note later on that somebody tried to stand on a rocking chair because they thought it would be even harder. It's not about the hardness of it. It's literally about doing something that seems to have no value other than the fact that you're telling yourself to do it and you're doing it. That's the important part. There are other things too, like, why did I pick a chair? You could say stand in a corner facing the corner. It's like, oh, some people could have a moral connotation to that, right? It's like, I didn't say put a dunce cap on too, right? It's like, but if somebody had a bad experience, it's like, I might not want to do that. It might bring a whole trauma cascade to me. So, but standing on a chair usually is pretty safe, right? But it also gives me a different perspective, right? So it's like, and, because not many of us, well, for me, vertically challenged, to add 18 inches to my height is a huge deal, right? It's like, I get a totally different view of the world from standing on a nice 4-leg chair, right? And so you just stand there and observe. It's not like you're doing anything. The whole idea is that you're not doing anything, right? It's like you're just standing there for 5 minutes. Set your clock or on your phone or your watch or whatever it is. You just want to do. When you tell yourself you're going to do something for a certain amount of time, you do it. right? It's not like, oh, this is crazy, it's 2 minutes, I'm going to get down. That's long enough. No, you told yourself 5 minutes, do it for 5 minutes. It's like, it does a lot of things, right? I mean, it's like not many of us just stand still and do nothing for 5 minutes in the course of our normal day. I mean, we're always busy, we're doing stuff. Everybody's busy, they have things to do. So it's saying that this exercise has some value, even if we're not sure, other than the fact that we're following through with what we do, what that actual value is, right? So, but we're doing it. And so, and getting up on a chair, it's like something ridiculous, basically. I mean, it is. And so, and then, there's that idea of a different perspective, right? So it's like, okay, but that's going to wear off after about, a minute. And then 4 minutes, you're just going to be going like, standing on a chair. Okay, still standing here. God, is it, oh, geez, it's only a minute and a half. So, but it's the idea that you're following through with what you've stated to do. So that's one thing. The other thing could be, and this may have a little bit more of an added value to it, but not in a value that you would, normally think of, right? So, and it comes from a study, and I've done this one. It works really well. And basically, it's like instead of standing on a chair for 5 minutes, you stand, if you're a woman, you stand in the Wonder Woman pose, so straight back and, hands in a fist and on your hips, and like really projecting that aura of, Wonder Woman. So it's literally in the stance itself that causes, back straight, shoulders back, everything, in good alignment, right? And you're just literally standing there, like surveying, your territory, basically, and, sort of bringing up that feeling, what is it like to be, Wonder Woman, to have superpowers, to be in that place, and for men, it'd be Superman, right? So it's like, standing, in a very, again, sort of military posture, right? Back straight, shoulders back, but arms crossed in front of your body, like in the old, Superman, sort of tradition, and standing there and thinking, my cape is flying out behind. It's not a visualization exercise, but just kind of imagining that attitude, right? And in the physical posture of that, you're assuming that attitude, right? And so the funny part with those two is that, and both of them are the same, right? But we've seen from clinical evidence that when you stand in that posture, and I believe it is 5 minutes, I could be wrong on that, don't quote me, but between 3 and 5 minutes, when you stand in that posture for that amount of time, it actually produces a huge spike of testosterone, both in men and women. Right. So, and we know testosterone is that hormone that gets us motivated, right? It makes us do things. We want to act at that point. So, I like that exercise because if you don't do it, it's still value wise, there's not, it's not a huge thing. If you don't do it, it's not going to be like, oh, you're a bad person. Right. It's like, but you also have that added benefit. If you want to double down, you can stand on the chair in that position, so it's like, compound the craziness with the extra efforts, because now you're above the normal view that you usually see, right? So it even instills more of that, that attitude, right? And will produce even more, I believe, of that hormone and structure. And when you get down, you're going to move into the world in that way. So I would suggest doing it in the morning if you can. If it's in the afternoon or in the evening, right, you're going to do it like as soon as you get home, right? Because, you don't want to be boosting your testosterone right before you go to bed. You're going to have a hard time sleeping, right? So, I mean, it doesn't stay there for ages, right? But it's utilized, right? We know clinically that this has been proven over and over again repeatedly in the lab that this will happen and, has positive benefits, right? So that's how I would do that. Now, what's on the other side? Why would I do this? Besides all of the common sense things that we've already gone over of why you want to project and do that prospective memory forward, right? So the first thing is just being able to do a single act repeatedly every day. Every day. That's really important. So you're going to find a time to do that every day. So what happens if you miss it? What happens if you don't do it? two things that you can do, right? Because again, the human hardwired psychology is more that, again, that we move away from pain and we move toward pleasure, right? So those things that are rewarding, we're getting our dopamine rush from doing it, right? And every day we do it, we got one more check mark on the thing. It becomes a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, right? And so even when we overcome the resistance of this is crazy, we're getting a little dopamine push when we do that. Okay, so it's that incentive reward, incentive dopaminergic process in the brain, right? So it's all compounding together. So what happens if we don't do it? Well, we need a little punishment, as you know, Filch would say in Harry Potter, right? I want to see some punishment. So we don't want to make it too drastic, right? Because I could tell you all kinds of stories in history, right, of, you know, people that, you know, have taken that out to like extremes, which is just ridiculous. And most people will go like, I would never do that. But, you know, it's a weird thing, right? It's like how our bodies and hormones and neurochemicals play into this and make it, you know, if you're a person that, you know, tends to, you know, would move toward that, then, you know, there's a likelihood that you would, you know, make it worse than you have to on yourself, right? So thinking that would progress you even more, but it won't. Okay, so it's literally just some little thing. I'll give you two things that I'd like you to try, or, you know, pick one or the other. So if you don't do it, the one that I used to do was, I just take a rubber band of different sizes or whatever, and I put it around my wrist and keep it on there, you know, for that day. And, you know, if I remembered that day that I didn't do it, I'd be like, oh, you know, oh, darn, I didn't do that. And so you kind of anticipate what's coming, and I take the rubber band and I snap it, right? And so the whole time it's like you're trying to even make it, you know, I don't want you to do it 20 times to put a welt on your skin. That's not the point. It's all an internal exercise, right? So it's like, you know, I would, you know, sort of like, I mean, how bad is it, right? For an adult, you know, a rubber band snap is not that big a deal. I'm not telling you to get a rubber band the size of my thumb. Okay. It's like, you're not putting an exercise band on there and like trying to break your arm off. Okay. It's not like that. It's a little rubber band, right? So, but you know, it's not pleasant, right? So it's just that little tiny thing that says like, oh, I didn't do it. Here's what you get when you don't follow through. And so, you know, I pull it back with that anticipation. Oh, no. You know, and it's like, oh, okay, darn. And now the next day I'm going to remember. And you'll be surprised with that slight bit of training how your brain will push you. The will start to remind. It'll start to, you know, come to the forefront and really remind you like, oh, you've got to do the chair thing. Oh, you've got to do the Superman thing. Oh, you've got to do the Wonder Woman thing. You know, so it's just, again, how to train it, right? The other one, if you don't like the rubber band idea, it's like, if you like, take something that you like, you know, for me would be obviously my coffee first thing in the morning, right? It's like, damn, you know, the rubber band, I'll take the rubber band any day, right? It's like, don't be taking my coffee away first thing in the morning. So it's like, so, but you could use that, right? You like your cup of tea in the morning, you like, you know, you don't get that first cup of coffee. You don't get that first cup of tea first thing in the morning, right? Like later on, okay, whatever. You know, it's like, what's the worst that can happen? But it's again, because you like it so much, and it's that comfort, it's the routine of the day, getting started and all of that. You know, if you take that away, there's that little bit of like, oh, you know, well, maybe tomorrow you'll remember to stand on a chair, you know? And so it's like, so again, just that little bit of impetus there, you know, will get the will to get on board and start reminding you, and you'll be more motivated to remember the next day, because who wants to go without coffee for 2 days in a row? Holy crap. know, I'd be climbing the walls at that point, right? So I'd be like, no, drive back home, get on the chair. So yeah, so I mean, that's the total of the exercise basically. And you know, it's the idea that we're doing something that isn't the norm for us. It's not like adding something that would just get lost in the rush of the day. It's something unique and unusual, but has no real value to it, you know, per se. But the idea is that you're doing it. You know, the first stepping stone is to get your mind and your physical body to be on board, right? It's like, I have this thought, I've made this commitment to do this, and now I'm going to do it. Even if it's ridiculous, I'm going to treat it as if it has real value. And I'm going to go and I'm going to do this. And usually the more ridiculous like that, the better, you know, because, and, you know, I was telling you ahead of time, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, like, it sounds like it's really important in setting us up for success with some of the like techniques we'll be doing for lucid dreaming, where we're getting up in the middle of the night and, you know, doing these things that are way outside of our normal patterns of living. And especially when you throw like tiredness into the equation or something like that, right? It's going to put more pressure on the situation. And it's like, if you haven't established that you follow through with what you intend to do, you know, there's no way that combined with being tired that the likelihood of you following through with those things is very low, right? And I'm sure that having the will developed also bleeds through into that kind of control and focus that it takes to navigate within a dream as well.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why, you know, it seems like such a small thing. And I remember many places in my training, and I've heard this from other people too, that, you know, we were told to do things that we didn't really understand why we were doing it. You know, again, it was sort of like one of those things we were always speculating, you know, like, is it just to see if we'll do it? Is it just to, you know, are they laughing behind our backs? And, oh, we made them eat mud, you know, ha ha ha. You know, like your your older brother or something is like, yeah, try it. It's a mud pie. It's really good. You know, it's like, is it that, or was there something else? And then, like, you know, sometimes literally, I'm not doing this to you, but sometimes, you know, it might be a couple of years before we would see where that small piece would fit into the training puzzle, but would produce a whole thing. Now, imagine, you know, I mean, that's always been in my head, because I thought, how crazy is that they trained this little tiny piece way back here with no explanation, and then, you know, put it in a place. If the person actually got to that stage of the training, they would have that already, that ability ready to install in that spot. Because if they went all the way through and did that and got to that spot, they'd have to go all the way back and relearn that.
Right. Like what would be an example of that?
You know, they're so obscure that, I mean, those are so really obscure that I can barely, I can't really bring one up to mind really quickly. I'd have to think about it and looking back in my notebooks or whatever. Right. But I remember a few times of it being that way. And I thought, that's amazing that they could think, you know, that far in advance and say like, oh, well, we think they're going to get to this stage. We need to start training this little aspect and get that down, but it's not connected to anything else except if you get to this place. Right. And so, which, like I said, sometimes it was, you know, a year or two out, you know, where that would be. So, you know, most of them weren't like that, right? They were like in sequence, right? Learn this step, even though it looks ridiculous. Okay, the next week we're going to put this in. Oh, this is where it goes. Oh, this is where it goes. Okay, now I can see the context. Now I can see how this would be. Every time we do something like that, it will be easier. And this is part of the will too. It'll be easier to sort of, you know, put your rational self aside to some extent to say, oh, we've done this many times and we've seen it. Okay, let's go in and do this. There's less resistance to it. In the beginning, I expect a lot of resistance to stuff like this because it's kooky, right? But I was going to say, like I was talking to you in the beginning before we got on on the recording, and I said, you know, it's funny though. Like when we look in some of these allegories and like nursery rhymes and you know, like grim fairy tales, all of that, right? And so a lot of times, you know, even in our stories and our myths, you know, our archetypes, you know, the stories that have come down through the ages in every culture, right? It's the guys that are the wise people, the magicians, the wizards, the, you know, mystics, all of these people, they always had this bit of a weird quirk to them, right? Like everybody would be like, oh, you know, it's like, yeah, he talks to himself, or, oh, you know, he does these funny things, you know, and like he buries eggs in the woods, you know, and, you know, all of these weird things, right? And everybody just kind of like, oh, that's another one of those things to stay away from, you know, because he's a weirdo, right? It's not because he's harmful, but we just don't know what forces they're playing with. Or is he just a little bit off? And that's why, he's sort of been inducted into this profession or whatever you want to call it, right? But they always had those little weird quirks, right? Funny clothes, they were always a little bit off from the normal people. And so, and I think, about these, more than anything else, I think about these little exercises in training the will that sort of relate to that. It's like they don't have, from the outside world, it looks like you've lost it, right? Like you wouldn't be doing this in the middle of work, it's like they'd be like calling the ambulance for you, right? So it's like, so it's kind of, you'd be doing it in private more or less, right? Or you'd be telling, maybe your significant other, like, oh, I've got to do this kooky exercise, don't laugh at me, or laugh at me. It doesn't matter because it'll just make it harder to do. And, maybe I'll get more out of it from that. So, but it's those little bit of, we don't really know. I mean, and looking at it from that perspective of, those initiatic territories of reading those stories, right? It's like, you look at it and we laugh at it when we read it to the kids, but in hindsight, when I look at it, I go, I've done quite a few of those kooky things, and it's like, oh, now I read it with a different appreciation. Like, what's he doing? Is he training his will, or is he doing something else? Maybe he's not speaking to himself, it's like all these little quirky things, right? So, in some way, it is part of that archetype. And, we are dealing with things that for most people are invisible, right? And for most people, they don't pay a lot of attention to their dreams, but, so we have to change ourselves to be amenable to not just moving into our dreams and putting more attention on them, but actually to, sort of, being so involved in it that we're manipulating them and really gaining a lot of benefit from that, right? That's a whole different level than just having a lucid dream for fun, right? We're talking about actually utilizing the dreams for the betterment of our lives on all levels, right? Here in the waking world, right? So, so we have to train ourselves unlike other people train, right? So that you can do the things that other people can't do, right? So it's in those respects, when I look at it, it's like, oh, okay, I kind of get it when you say it that way. And I remember having those thoughts too, because there were plenty of things that I was very uncomfortable doing just because of my personality, right? Talk to plants, this, do that. I've told those stories a million times. So it's like, but once I realized the benefit of it, then it was like, oh, now I can see the benefits. And now that I've experienced the benefits, it makes sense. And so, you lose some of that. But again, it's like, do the best players in the world of any sports, do they do things that seem unusual or are completely different than the other people that are also professionals, but they're not the super professionals. They're not the Michael Jordans. They're not the LeBron James. They're not the Joe Namaths. They those guys have taken it to a whole new level and have done stuff like, throwing foul shots blindfolded for hours. It's like doing things like that, right? So that they just have almost a sixth sense of where they are. So hitting it, with eyes open is like, that's child's play, right? So, but how many people would actually spend their time doing that rather than going out with somebody or, having fun or, going home and eating a nice meal or, I'm sure they did those things too, but you know what I mean? It's like they've taken their training to a level because they wanted to take their experience to a different level. And I think a lot about that when we do these types of things. And, they may seem like small things now, but when we string them together, you're going to see like, oh, okay, now I got it. And when you can put them into practice in the lucid dream, you're going to see a level of control that most people could only dream about, or they think that it's complete, fantasy. So, but these things are really important. So, so that's how I would do that. A nice, simple exercise, but it will start training the will, and that's a really important thing.
Nice. All right, cool. Well, I think I can handle that.
I think you can.
Should be a problem. Stand on a chair 14 times over the next couple of weeks. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So 5 minutes a day, standing on a chair or standing in that Superman pose, and doing it with the idea in mind that if we forget to do it, we have that either that snapping of the rubber band on the wrist consequence, or the taking away for a day of our morning coffee or something like
Right.
that we enjoy. Yeah.
Right. 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 Exactly.
Cool. Yeah. It sounds, yeah, sounds good.
Nice and simple anyway. We'll
Yeah.
see, we'll see the success, because it is just a small training block, but it's important that we got to start someplace, right?
Right.
So,
Cool.
and to do what to align yourself with what you think and what you speak and what your action is, when those are all integral, you're going to move forward in this world in a way that most people don't. There's less wandering back and forth in the desert, right? It's like you have a goal, you get to it.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, man. And
No problem.
get on to the next segment.
See you on the flip flop.